O'Connor of the Irish Independent is here in studio, still here in studio. You're very welcome.
Cheers.
So what is the latest? They were up in Belfast for training camp and a little bit of R&R. You were saying in the news round they went out for dinner. They had a few drinks in Rome. They were encouraged to go out for a few drinks in Rome. They did the Black Cab tour and tried to enjoy each other's company. That's what we're hearing.
Yeah, a little bit. I think, these. I don't think that this is unusual. I think, obviously we're looking more into it because of the body language and the stressed look of the team that we talked about last week after in Rome.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but like in the midst of all this where people are talking about how they just need to enjoy themselves a bit more, the Rome performance came a day after they were laughing uproariously in the bus at the escort.
I didn't mean I didn't mean to bring that up because they didn't look
like a team that were frayed around the edges and were sitting there, their nerves gone. They were all just in the bus, laughing their heads off at this mad cop driving them around Rome. And then they still went out the next day and put in that performance.
If we think that lightening the mood is the cure for all ills, that probably suggests that it doesn't. It didn't work that time because they would have all gotten off that bus in great form and. If that could lighten their mood on the day of the match, they just looked so serious on the day of the match, and I think they'll be back to that again this week. But you would hope that even training in the sunshine, the weather in Belfast was excellent last week. I was up there on Friday. They had an open session for a lot of school kids, and it was James Ryan was being interviewed by a number of daily journalists, and he was the one who kind of told us, because we were asking him, is it important? A lot of people have asked. I've been suggesting that you just need to go on the lash. He said, he'd quite say we went on the lash, but he said, we enjoyed ourselves after Rome. He'd gone over as a travelling reserve. He wasn't involved in the team, but himself and Cian Healy were the extra men. And then when they got to Belfast, they did Wednesday. I think Wednesday night they went out for dinner, which I think is standard on these down weeks. And then, Black Cab tour on Thursday, which again takes your mind off the job at hand.
Puts life in perspective in some ways.
Possibly a little bit, James Ryan's a student of history. He'd be, I'd say, one of the more interested lads in it. And then on Friday they got through a fairly serious body of work. Probably what was most interesting was who wasn't there. Sean Bryan, Sean Cronin, both left behind. Robbie Henshaw had apparently been there earlier in the day, had headed back, but he looks like he's back in contention this week. Dan Levy was watching. Joey Carberry and Johnny Sexton were behind the goal doing pretty short of sprint work, but they were doing running away from the squad. And Jack Carty ran everything ran the whole show on the pitch. He was the only fit out half in the squad.
Great for him.
Good exposure. Against the under-20s as well, and that's always fun to watch because the 20s are always up for it and always want to get stuck in. So,
did the 20s ever come close?
Oh, they caused them all sorts of problems because the 20s are, it's obviously not full contact, so that the senior team can't blow them away with the way they probably would like to. But Ryan was actually, it's only 3 years since Ryan was one of the 20s trying to take the head off a couple of senior men and make a mark, and it always gets a bit more. There's a bit more contact than you'd expect. It starts off quite light and it's kind of grab tackle, but it kind of escalates a little bit as it goes on.
Invariably,
you wouldn't be surprised at the heads. But then they were rotating players in and out behind the goal. They were doing fitness work. It was really intense, and they come off pretty tired. So
Dan Levy watching suggests he's not nearly ready yet.
Him and Henshaw had done a fairly serious strength session, I think, beforehand, and it sounds like Levy is close and Henshaw is close, and they hope to have them both training. You always take what they tell you with a pinch of salt when it comes to players coming back from injury and stuff like that. But O'Brien's absence would suggest that Levy is closer because Murphy wasn't involved either. So I'd say Van der Fleer starts this week, and it's up for debate who's on the bench. Jack Onham and CJ Stander were there. Stander's back as well. So if you bring Stander back, that kind of takes some of Sean O'Brien's role away anyway. And then you bring, you've got Tyke Byrne back on the bench, so he covers 6. So you could have a specialist on the bench. There's a couple of permutations there that are interesting.
Did we ever get confirmation of what's wrong with CJ Stander officially? Was it just his brother-in-law?
No, only his brother-in-law, Okay. He had facial injuries. Injuries that were very specifically explained by his brother-in-law.
So I'd love your interpretation of the Sean Cronin and Sean O'Brien return to Leinster. So not part of this Belfast training group, but then equally not involved for Leinster. If we start with Sean O'Brien firstly, Sean O'Brien doesn't do captain's runs for the last couple of years at times, and he's in that managing his own body, knowing his own body territory, as is right. So are we expecting him to link up with everybody at Carton House this week and be fully involved?
Yeah, I think both of them will be. In fairness, Joe Schmidt said about Sean Cronin that you wouldn't write off anyone after one bad performance. We know how good Sean Cronin is. Now, I think Niall Scannell will be on the bench with Rory Best starting this weekend, but Cronin will remain a very viable option for Ireland, going towards the World Cup, because he's too good to leave out. He just had a bad day at a terrible time. As far as I'm aware, they were both available to play for Leinster, but either they came back too late and Leinster had already kind of named their team and had gotten that far with preparations, or else relations between the two camps are not great because of Jack McGrath and everything else that's going on. I'm not sure, but they weren't selected. Schmidt said that O'Brien was on a kind of a managed training week, so take that for what it is. But if he was going to be involved, I'd be very surprised if he was going to be involved. A bit like Rob Kearney not going to Portugal. If he was going to be involved in these two, certainly in the first of these two games, he would have been in camp at least watching on. If he can do gym work in Belfast. The facilities in Queens were unbelievable. I was quite taken aback by them. They were really, really good. So that's the suggestion. Like you can read too much into these things, but I mean, if you're going to play against France, you would be in the pre-France camp.
Yeah, I would have thought so. And that's interesting. One of the possibilities you say there is that Leinster maybe you're not feeling as well disposed to the RFU to just play them because they send the lads back. That's
a theory.
Total speculation. Yeah. But it was notable that Mick Dawson came out last week with your own paper and talked about forced migration.
Yep.
Clearly Leinster are starting to feel more than just a little bit hard done by. The story goes that McGrath and the IRFU want McGrath to make the move to Ulster to give him more first team opportunities. There is going to be a point where Leinster are going to be turning to the IRFU and saying, you got to help us out here a little bit as well.
Yeah, and the problem that Leinster have is that they have too many players who are able to get into the team, and it's one of life's great problems. I mean, they chose not to pick Jack McGrath in that Toulouse game based on form.
Yeah.
But if you're leaving a test line out of your squad, he's going to ask himself, is this the best place for me to develop my, to put myself in the shop window for Ireland?
Clearly has.
Which he didn't, because he's lost his place in the Ireland 23 to Dave Kilcoyne, who's starting every time for Munster. So he's made a very logical and rational decision in conjunction with the IRFU to seek out the option of Ulster. I haven't had any update on what I wrote last week in terms of whether he signed the deal or not, but all the indications are that that's where he's going. So if you don't play these players, they will seek opportunity elsewhere, and they know that if they take themselves abroad, like McGrath would get a great contract somewhere abroad if he wanted, but he can't play for Ireland, and it's too important to him. And the RFU want to keep him because they know he's a world-class loosehead prop who has fallen on a bit of bad form this year, but like a couple of his teammates, we know the class is permanent and he hasn't become a bad player. So it's Ulster wanted to sign Dennis Buckley and have gone to the RFU saying, can we go and sign a loosehead from abroad, because Buckley's re-signed with Connacht, and suddenly here they are. Jack McGrath's been presented as a solution to their problems, and they're like, it's because Irish qualified. We know how good he is. It's just perfect for them, and he's fallen into their lap. And Leinster are annoyed, but Leinster didn't pick him. Otherwise it would have been Ed Byrne going up the road, or Peter Dooley, who isn't as established, but they're both really, really good players. And now Leinster's job is to make them as good as Jack McGrath. But if Leinster's going to need to stop producing players if they want to stop having these headaches.
Yeah, it's true. I'm being told Ronan O'Gara is joining us live on the line from New Zealand. You're there?
Hiya, Joe. Yeah.
How are you? Thanks for joining us. I know you're busy. You're being pulled into meetings left, right and centre at the moment. Yeah, I am. Yeah, my apologies. Yeah, I just it's whatever 8:30 over here, so it's the working day has started. So we're getting prepared for the Chiefs at the weekend. So it's an interesting conversation you were having. That's a fascinating subject about Jack McGrath, isn't it? Yeah, it is. We'll bring you in it now. So by the way, congrats! I see Crusaders. They beat the Reds at the weekend. Is that 18 straight wins now? So you're just going to go in and get the cigars out and put your feet up around the office for a Tuesday and a Wednesday now? No, it's not. No, it's Monday now till Tuesday lunchtime. Basically, it's this is my first time doing one of these, so it's pretty intense. But it's good to take 10-15 minutes off and have a chat, see what's happening back home. So well, we were just talking Jack McGrath going to Ulster there. I suppose it makes sense from his point of view, and he was actually the one, it seems, insofar as we can understand it, who initiated the chat. He wants first team rugby. You can't really blame him, and Ulster are delighted, and Leinster probably feel it's another loss to our squad, but there's not much anyone can do. Yeah, but I suppose it's probably unique in the fact that it's, as Rory's pointing out, it's a British and Irish lion, probably a man with probably a higher stature than other players, in the fact that he's achieved an awful lot in the game. I don't think we've seen this situation before where I suppose an established international, he's a well-established international, is changing provinces. So in that regard,
I think the story becomes very interesting. But you can understand it from both sides, really. But it's a very, I suppose, a strange one to me, in the fact that I would never seen it happen. But guys, if they're not playing rugby, that's what happens when you get to a certain age. They need to play and they want to play, and he's obviously desperate to get on the pitch more frequently. So, you know what I mean? I think to get to this stage, it's obviously a real life story, even though we don't know he has signed.
And do you find it strange, say he does sign, do you find it strange that he's taken that option as opposed to try and fight Cian Healy for his place?
No, I don't think, because I think for years, the two of them, obviously 50-30 or 30-50 in terms of their minutes, and obviously I don't understand why, I suppose at this stage he's in this position, and obviously Rory explained it really well in the fact that David Kilcoyne is playing consistently well for Munster and he's getting the bench spot for Ireland. But Cian Healy, I think if you go back a number of years, Jack McGrath had the shout ahead of him, and then I think Cian probably had a look at himself and reinvented himself, went about it in a different way and started playing great rugby again. I'm sure Jack McGrath's capable of doing that. I think he wouldn't have hit the heights maybe in the last 18 months than he was maybe 4 years ago. But I think when players, if you know that's inside you, you just maybe have to reformulate recalibrate the engine and go about it in a different way. So from Ulster's point of view, what a player to be getting. Would I? I don't think for someone like Jack, he's avoiding the fight. I wouldn't put it that way, Joe. I don't think that's it. I think he's probably thought about this, and you know, I mean, I think if it's not really, you don't have the stomach for the fight to take on Cian Healy, I would say that's not the way of looking at it. I would say it's a case that he feels that the competition in Ulster and in any other club don't have a loose head of the quality of Cian Healy, which augments his chances of getting more minutes as a result.
To move on to the week ahead, Joe Schmidt had very interesting comments. I don't know if you managed to catch them over there. I know you're busy. But it was quite striking language from Schmidt, because it was strong language, and he doesn't always give that kind of content when he's speaking. So he was talking about this Six Nations, and he used the phrase that he thinks the Irish players are a bit broken. That was his word, a bit broken by the England game, which is very interesting.
I read that interview. Yeah, it was a fascinating interview. But I think, in fairness to the head coach, I think he's been extremely honest and forthright. I would say probably, and a lot more direct maybe in his dealing with the media in the last a few weeks. I thought the language he used was very interesting, and I think Joe was in the box like a lot of us in the ground when England came to Dublin that day. I think for, I suppose, internationals, ex-internationals, people probably that have got great, I suppose, reward out of an Irish jersey. It was kind of what's the word? A kind of a mentally shocking performance in the terms of the ferocity of England's challenge. It just looked like they had an answer for whatever Ireland threw at them for that 80 minutes. And that's not necessarily to say that they won't have solutions in the future, but I got the impression watching it with you that it just looked like England had an answer, and we were, I would use the word shell shock as of kind of sitting there. We didn't seem to have, for the first time ever, a kind of a solution to what the opposition defence had thrown in front of us, because it just seemed their spacing was so good, their line speed was so good, their, I suppose, body language was so good, and their capacity to repeatedly do the simple things was very impressive. And you just got the impression leaving the ground that day that it wasn't the result. I think that obviously we hate losing to, or dislike greatly losing to England in a game at home, but it was more the manner of, I suppose, the way that they spooked us, which could have potential long-term effects for the confidence of the team. And I think he's exactly right, Joe, in the fact that the Scottish game and the Italian game was I think that's what happens in sport when you don't play on autopilot, I think. You know what I mean? You can see it even in great players around the world. I think when you don't have that flow state, you go into a state of a process where every simple decision becomes a little bit more difficult than it should. And the opposite of that is when you are in flow state, the game is so easy and you don't even think about things. You just kind of play on autopilot and everything seems to click for you.
And Ronan, have you, either as a coach or as a player, been involved in setups where an emphatic defeat, a bit like this English one over Ireland, did destabilise things, did rock confidence, did leave the players, to use Schmidt's word, a bit broken?
Yeah, of course, Joe. I've had that sort of a lot more frequently than the current guys, I think. But I think, was potentially our team stroke, in 2010 or whenever it was. We I think had that feeling in our stomachs plenty of times, but we were capable of finding a solution for it because it happened more frequently to us. I suppose the difference in this side is that Ireland had a far greater degree of consistency in their performance. So when you get a belt like this and you're not used to it, you don't really know, because it has been kind of, after 2018 especially, there was new expectation on the Irish team, and then all of a sudden in your first game of a new campaign you get a massive belt where you're derailed, and it's fair to say at the minute that they haven't had a performance yet, I suppose, to maybe stabilise even the perception of us on the outside world.
Yeah. If you were to kind of sum up the issues that you've seen in the last 3 games, it'd be great if you could kind of boil it down to a few simple things, because even Johnny Sexton was in here in the last week or so, and he was making the argument that there's the England game, and then there have been different things in the next 2 games. Like he said, against Scotland, there were issues with the Irish shape. He said we didn't have enough width in our attack. And then he said against Italy, we had fixed that, but then a bunch of other things start going wrong and we start making basic errors. So Sexton was almost making the point they've had different things in each game and not necessarily the same issue. What's the big issue or 2 or 3 that you will be looking out for sure against France?
Yeah, I think obviously, Johnny's the general of that team, so in terms of, I suppose, shape, he'd be an expert in that. For me, with as an outsider, without, I suppose, a real idea of the strategy they're trying to play with, it wasn't that evident, I found, watching it, but because of the way his brain works, anything, I suppose, that isn't in correct shape, he'd be all over that. I would say, what in the Italian game, the transition from kind of ball delivery from line out between loose forwards and Connor, that you don't see that in Irish teams very often. Knock-ons, poor passes. That's a behaviour that doesn't exist in the Irish camp yet. We've kind of probably seen more handling errors than we're used to seeing. A lot of drop balls, which is inaccurate passing, maybe pass quality. We don't associate that with a Joe Schmidt team. So I think that one of the key things, and it's important then that they, I suppose, get the language right in how they go about trying to fix that. Because if you try and create something where your big emphasis is on playing a safe game, I think that could be counterproductive, because you'll have fellas nearly afraid to pass, and that's not going to help Ireland's case at all. They need to express themselves. So I would say a big focus in the Irish camp would be tempo,
right,
especially for the French game, because they'll try and break them for the first 60 and then do the damage in the last 20. So I think tempo will be very important, and trying to get rhythm. As you say, you look at, and I'll never forget, I think, being in the ground for the New Zealand game, there was just a flow to that performance that we haven't seen in a long while. And obviously it becomes the benchmark and everyone reverts back to that. But it was a very strange feeling, I think, playing New Zealand and kind of within 5 minutes knowing that the result wasn't in doubt.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing to say, but I genuinely felt that in the ground. While then, go forward 4 months and I know it was tied up to the 65th minute of the English game, but I didn't think the result was in doubt. I think England had broken us before that and did the damage in the last 15 on the scoreboard, but that's what happens in big test games. So, sorry, George, making it a bit quicker. I would say tempo and flow, I would think, and their rhythm.
Who's driving that now, Ronan? Is this coming from within the dressing room now, or how much are the coaches trying to find fixes for this anxiousness and all that sort of stuff, or does it have to come from Rory, from Johnny Sexton, from Conor Murray, from the players themselves?
Yeah, I would say it would be probably a joint mission. I presume it would be. Obviously, the coaches are probably there. I would say key ideas are key points, but no more than 3, I'd say, established for the French game. And then I presume the leaders would meet on Sunday night or Monday morning, kind of going, this is how we see the the week panning out, and this is what's important to us. And if Joe believes it, then they'll drive that every moment of every meeting in camp. So I think it would be joint between the leaders in the strategy room and the leaders in the coaching team.
Yeah, the word from France. I mean, look, we're kind of nitpicking here over an Irish team that have so many processes in place that are brilliant. The word from France. The word from France is that after the defeat at Twickenham, where they were really bad, obviously, Bernard Laporte gave them the speech afterwards, told them enough is enough, and he's been on the training ground in the build-up to the Scottish game, and he had a big hand in selection, and Jacques Brunel is, I don't know, sort of standing there with his hands in his pockets a little bit. So that's the kind of madness that's going on there. That said, they have probably stumbled upon a backline that makes a lot more sense. They've Ramos in his position, they've Vujay in his position, they've Fico in his position, Dupont and Ntamack, you'd have to say, did reasonably well. So how dangerous is this French team coming to Dublin?
Yeah, they are dangerous, but I think I agree in what you said. I don't think the French themselves know how good or how bad they could be, because it seems to me that they have a game plan, but it's a non-rigid game plan. It's kind of a jouer game plan. Go express yourselves. The whole, I suppose, philosophy is in keeping the ball alive. That's what they train and they work, So, as you say, kind of winning one-on-one. While Ireland's mindset would be way more detailed than the French. But that's not to say, I think they have halfbacks that are very, very exciting, that play the game very freely. And I think the form they're in, they will, even though the French system, our test team isn't going too well. The guys are having exceptional seasons with Toulouse, and Toulouse are back, and there's a new energy about Toulouse, so they'll be gaining confidence in that regard. And I think they pick people in their position, and they will do for this weekend also. So they have some great individuals. I think people that know French rugby, there's a lot of strength in their individuals. I think, as we all know, the challenge is how can you collectively combine that to make them a strong unit.
Two last quick questions before you go. To sum up the rugby situation from an Irish point of view, these 3 performances are out of keeping with what we saw last year. Concern is kind of the most common word I've seen used over here. People are concerned. How concerned are you in broad terms? Or do you think this team are going to sort these issues out very, very quickly?
I don't know if they sort it out very quickly. I think the only issue about sorting it out, I think, is that it's sorted out for World Cup time. And I think, from my experiences of that, is that prior form doesn't matter. What happens when you get to World Cup, and speaking from experience, is that you got to hit the ground running, and you got to get energy, and you got to get momentum in that competition. So I think there are 3 phases that are happening before that. You'll have the Six Nations phase, you'll have post Six Nations where boys are playing European, and then you'll have the World Cup warm-ups. The minute the World Cup warm-ups end, you're looking at seeing who's fit, who's injured, who's ready to go. Yeah. And then you go to Japan, and that takes a life of its own completely. And there's an absolute skill in itself. Prior form to that, doesn't matter. Obviously, it helps if you're one of the better teams in the world and you're not completely underperforming. But I wouldn't. I actually think if Ireland's performance against England was to happen at the World Cup, it would have been, I think, too difficult to arrest the slide in a World Cup.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, and Joe's words, I think back that up, that they're broken. I don't think you can stop that in 4 or 5 weeks. While I think now they've got the belt, and it's time to, I think, stabilise. I would look for in the remaining 2 games, and then I think grow the energy in the World Cup warming ups, looking to go up to a whole new level come World Cup time.
Yeah, okay, interesting. And then the very last one, I know you touched on this with Adrian on Friday morning when the news had just broken about World Rugby's plans. Certainly up here in the Northern Hemisphere, there's raised eyebrows to say the least. I don't think anyone's too enamoured with their plans, and we've seen the players come out against it, several high-profile players. What's the talk down there?
Yeah, it's. I think there's been a lot of talk down here. I think it just, it isn't, I think there's kind of a lot of raising eyebrows down here as well, and there's an awful lot of uncertainty, and people are kind of, obviously, there's an awful lot of Pacific Island boys playing here, so it would be a huge interest to them. So it's basically, Joe, it's a wait and see kind of approach.
Yeah.
They understand, obviously, though, that the decision makers, I think, are powerful in the Northern Hemisphere, so they fear for what could happen, but they don't like the first proposal anyway, that's for certain.
No, I wouldn't think so. Listen, I know you're busy there. We'll let you go. Thanks a million.
Come on, Joe.
All right.
Rory, cheers.
Ronan O'Gara there, stepping out of a busy Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, yeah. That's an interesting point he makes there, and it's one I do share, actually. I honestly do think, regardless of what happens against France and Wales, even if they are close to unmitigated disasters, I think the effect they will have in 5 months down the line is close to zilch. I wouldn't even be the slightest bit worried. I think they'll take a break, they'll go back. Leinster could well win a European Cup. I think then the warm-up starts and there's the sun on their backs and there's a freshness about the whole thing. And crucially, the players, this has been an injury-ravaged Six Nations.
Yeah, he's used 34 players.
So I really am not worried is not the right phrase, but I just think there is such a gap. I think it takes on a life of its own, as O'Gara says. I'm quite pleased to hear that.
Go back to the launch, and Joe Schmidt said, you can't win a World Cup in the Six Nations, but you can lose your momentum.
Yeah.
And that English game checked the momentum.
Yeah.
And I think a decent finish, I'm not saying 2 wins necessarily, but 2 performances would basically be a kind of a par, get out of it, take a break and come back.
And
if things go badly,
how damaging do you think it is if they beat France by 8, not a great performance, and lose in Cardiff by 10? Would that change your view of the World Cup?
No, I think another England would be a big problem. If they don't play well at all during the entire Six Nations, you would have to have some concerns. It would only be
I'm not saying
rational.
it's good. I'm not saying
you can put a positive spin on it. You just don't want to see a team in decline in the year when they're supposed to peak. At the same time, there is loads of room. There's loads of good players there. I mean, they are missing players. They have had to make changes. They're going to have to make changes during the World Cup. He's using this 6 days between France and Wales basically as a dry run for the first 2 games against Scotland and Japan, which are pivotal to get to that South Africa/New Zealand game that I think everyone is anticipating. I think we need to see a bit of growth from the Scotland and Italy games, a bit of just a better energy around the team, a little less just stress, just
more pints. That's what we're saying. More drinks,
loads of pints. But I think if you look at the personnel that he can bring into the team this week, there's reason to believe there will be an improved performance. Gary Ringrose alone will make a big difference to the attack. Tadhg Beirne and Ian Henderson will add energy. The line-out will be more familiar. The flow of possession will be more solid, you would imagine. But France are a good team, and France, Wales, both more than capable of beating Ireland. It's more about the performance at this stage.
Okay.
It's not, don't panic, but you'd like to see a bit more positivity.
Our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone, team of us, everyone in. Ronan O'Gara from New Zealand and Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent there.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.
Retailers, don't miss out on one of the most important events of your year. Retail Excellence Retail Retreat and Expo, City West Convention Centre, May 21st and 22nd. Retail is changing from digital disruption to Brexit. Find out what's coming around the corner from 70 world-class retail experts, including Anthony Hooker, President and CEO of Southeastern Grocers USA. Hear the latest trends and learn how to grow your business online. Partners to Retail, get involved too. It's where you need to be.